few years ago, Nick and Susan Howard and their family moved into their new house here at Blythburgh in Suffolk. They were pottering around in one of their garden sheds, looking at one of the innumerable old cupboards, and they discovered that. A bit alarming, certainly. A bit scary, I think so. But not really surprising when you look at the rest of the garden. Isn't it fantastic? Looks a bit like a little church, doesn't it? Well, we know that King Henry I founded a priory somewhere in Blythburgh in the 12th century. And 500 years before that, a Saxon king was killed on these marshes and buried here. Could this overgrown garden have been one of the most sacred sites in East Anglia? It's a fantastic house. What's it called?
It's called the Priory.
And what's the road called running alongside it?
Priory Road.
Mick, do you think there might be some kind of clue there?
I think it's a bit of a clue, isn't it? There's something going on. We know there was a 12th century Augustinian priory in Blythburgh, so it's somewhere in this area.
You do realise that in order to find out what's going on here, we're really going to have to wallop your garden hard.
Yes, we understand that, but we'd rather that you didn't know before we start the restoration of the formal gardens.
Formal gardens. There's posh.
This is what I call herringbone masonry, because it looks like the bones of a fish. And it's a building style that you see in the Roman period, but you also get it right at the end of the Anglo-Saxon period into the beginning of the Norman period.
So are you saying that this whole building could be either from just before or just after William the Conqueror arrived?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably around about 1100, something like that, but round about that Norman conquest period.
This date is our first clue, as a 12th century Norman priory should follow a basic plan. There should be a great hall, dormitory for the monks to sleep in, and a refectory or dining area forming three sides of a cloister. And on the fourth side, there should be a church. And Mick's now confident that's what we have in this garden. So we're putting in a couple of trenches against this wall to test if the cloister is on the southern side of the church. And we're getting lots of broken brick and roof tile. But unfortunately, nothing that immediately screams cloister. But on the other side of the wall, Phil has found foundations that confirm Mick was right about these ruins. This was a church.
Oh, that is cracking stuff. It's the floor of the church. See, it's got this straight edge here. Well, look, that one's broken, but this is a lovely straight edge running across there. So that's just literally, presumably, a panel that goes around the outside. The main floor, they have that up. And you can see here, look, we've actually got the wall of the building here. Look how protected that is. Look, lovely, smooth surface there.
What's the colour about, Phil, and the black and the yellow kind of? Is that
Some sort of glazing or...?
Yeah, it is. They're glazed touch. So, I mean, if we get a few more of them, I mean, it may well be that we can get them into some sort of maybe checkerboard pattern, so they would have been black and white, yeah.
Oh, wow. You're going to dig that way?
Just try and stop us.
All right.
Hey, what you could do, you own the place.
When we arrived, I just assumed the Priory Church would be no more than a small chapel. But Bob, our buildings expert, believes there's far more to it. This column is now so eroded it looks like something out of Death Valley. But it's actually the remains of a sophisticated piece of architecture.
It really is a column, because if you look high up, you can see there's a change in angle, and there's a slight indent, and it comes in at a higher level. It suggests that we're on a triforium, so that there's probably another layer of arches running off in the other direction, perhaps only for one bay, but nonetheless, it's part of a pier.
What we have is this Price's reference in the 12th century Book of Ely, and it specifically refers to the death and burial at a place called Blythburgh. So we're talking about clearly a very important royal shrine, recognised and almost certainly invested in by Ely for its upkeep and maintenance. And indeed, the founding of the priory may relate to that shrine.
But that's extremely interesting, isn't it? If Anna's bones are still here in the 12th century, they could potentially be here to this day.
That's right. We know he's here somewhere in Blythburgh. And what's going on here in the 12th century? Why does King Henry make this great gesture and encourage this great priory to be founded? Or is it a refoundation of the early royal minster? That's the fascinating possibility. So this could really be one of the great discoveries of all time.
Sam believes there's a chance that when King Henry I founded the priory in Blythburgh, he built it on the site of the earlier Saxon church and its shrine to King Anna or Anna. But unfortunately, we've got to sort out the Norman Priory layout first, before we can deal with whatever else might be here. And frustratingly, John's now wandered off into next door's garden, determined to find out how far the Priory Church stretches away to the west. Stuart's sure Blytheborough would have been a sacred or religious refuge for centuries before King Anna died. His burial would almost certainly have attracted pilgrims for hundreds of years after. But would it have been to our sight?
I feel really perplexed about this, John.
Well, it would help if we could work out exactly what we have here. We're certain we have a priory church. The problem is the geophys doesn't really have much evidence for the rest of the priory.
I mean, clearly they're showing something. They're either showing, well, you say walls, there might be robber pits, whatever.
Well, look, they're definitely walls. The resistance there, that's the wall in Faye's Trench.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. So if that's a wall, there's no reason why these shouldn't be walls.
That would leave us with such a small cloister, if that's what's being indicated there, that I just wonder whether either the cloister is on the other side of the church, on the north side of the church over here, or that we're looking for a much more unconventional and irregular plan than we were expecting.
Well, Mick did warn me it wasn't going to be easy. But really, our geophys isn't working for us. And I'm not sure our trenches have told us that much either.
Nothing like an easy sight.
John's got it in one. And behind that calm exterior, I think Mick's really panicking. Why? Well, because none of us can understand this place, and it should be so simple.
If we get rid of that tree there...
We've already got all these trenches open looking for church walls, other buildings and the priory cloisters, but Mick wants more, including one trench in the middle of a hedge.
Hang on, you're in the fence. All the ivy's caught up in the fence.
But there is method in this madness, as Phil's new trench should locate the east end of the church to go with Matt's west end. So, realistically, after a day and a half of digging, we've got a priory church, but no priory. The only thing we've succeeded in is transforming this once elegant garden into something much less picturesque. It's a building site now, let's be honest.
Yeah.
We've got, what, 2 trenches there?
No, 3. There's one down the bottom there as well.
Yeah, all right, 3. We've got one just round the corner there.
And one over the fence in the next garden.
All right, come through here a minute. Come on, we've got one there.
Yeah, that's finished, that one.
One round the corner there.
And that's finished.
Little one there.
Yeah, that doesn't count.
Oh, doesn't it? Right, we've got one here.
That's finished,
over
yeah.
there. It's more like a pick and mix counter than what I think of as an archaeological dig.
I share your worries.
That's fair enough. I can breathe easier now. Carefully you don't fall down one of those little holes.
There we are. Quite confident that's a male. That's all we seem to have had so far is evidence for males.
One thing Mick knows is that there should be loads, even hundreds of burials at the foot of these consecrated walls. Which isn't that surprising, given that Blytheborough Priory was lived in for 400 years before Henry VIII dissolved it.
He found them and we all kind of shrieked and, Daddy!
And as Susan and her family found out, their remains can turn up in the most unexpected places.
We've got 3 different skulls.
Have you got enough to know whether they might be male or female?
Well, this one here is definitely male because you've got this enormous nuchal crest sticking out here.
Where is that?
That's the bit right at the back of the skull here. Mm-hmm. We're quite broad across here. It's quite flared at the back of the mandible, and it's fairly squared at the front, which again looks like a masculine one.
Well, there's a damn great hole there, look.
It's intriguing, isn't it? Can I put my hand in, or will
Yeah, well, I reckon. Oh, you think?
I don't want to get bit.
There ain't nobody in there, is it?
I don't know yet. Ah!
Yeah.
No, it's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, you don't want to go fertling about in there too much, because if there's something in there that is undisturbed...
It's a sobering thought. If Phil's going to find a vault or shrine associated with King Anna, then this is the place. The archaeology is once again causing all sorts of headaches. At the West End, Matt still hasn't found a wall big enough to hold up a church. While at the East End, Phil's finding more holes, and they don't look much like a Saxon shrine.
There's another bally-great void in there. I wonder whether we ain't got just big burrows. Whether that isn't what's creating our big hole down there.
This is more like Watership Down than Time Team, and Phil's probably got layers of demolition rubble to shift before he gets to any foundations. Whoever looted the stone from this old priory did a pretty thorough job.
The charters tell us that in around about 1300, there was an infirmary there. And with an infirmary, you would have an infirmary orchard.
But although we're struggling with the archaeology, we're still building up a fascinating picture of our priory.
We also have an inventory taken when the priory was dissolved, and it mentions a number of buildings. First of all, we have the religious ones. We've got the vestry mentioned, we've got the choir, we've got a chapel, but then we get mention of the kitchen, we get mention of the pantry, we get mention of the hall, we get mention of the parlour. These are the domestic activities of the priory. And then we get mention of a brew house.
Now, a brew house would be really, really fab, because I would like to brew.
The northern wall of the church? Yeah, so that lines up pretty well.
We've confirmed the north wall of the Norman church, and the trench is producing a jumble of roof tile, medieval window glass, and the church floor. But if there was an Anglo-Saxon monastery here, you'd have thought we'd have also found some Anglo-Saxon stuff with a hole this deep. Unfortunately, there's not a hint, not a smidge so far. At least there's progress at the East End, where Phil's uncovered big foundations as well as human remains.
Yeah, that's a bit of pelvis there, and there's a bit of rib there. And then in here, look, no, we've got a whacking great leg bone, I think.
Yeah. These bones here are sat in this light, sandy-coloured material right at the base of here, on which this wall appears to stand, which means these bones are potentially earlier than the construction of the priory itself.
Because they're under the rubble platform which was used to construct the priory. So
exactly.
if you're finding Anglo-Saxon skulls here, the Minster's back in the frame, isn't it?
It certainly is.
Since we arrived, Helen's always been convinced that King Anna's here somewhere.
So what are we likely to get here?
Well, we're going to have the east wall, the altar, and between the altar and the east wall is the classic place for shrine. So if we have King Anna here in the 12th century... No, because he could have been. Bear with me. If we have King Anna here in the 12th century, he's likely to be here through the whole of the medieval period. So this is the place that he's most likely to be.
Look, I'm going to be happy if we get the east wall of the church.
Back inside the church, Kerry's cleaned up the foot of the pillar, and it confirms this was an internal column, proving Bob's theory that the priory church had an aisle outside the nave.
A couple of days ago, you said that they couldn't be columns because they'd be the size of Tewkesbury Abbey or something. Monstrously enormous.
It's big. It's a special building. It really is. It must be the best bit of 13th century in the region.
We can now see how much land King Henry I gave the Augustinians to found the priory.
I've tried to get outside it to try and understand the precinct within which...
And there was rather more to it than the ruins in Nick and Susan's back garden.
We've in fact only got a relatively small part of the site which is protected at the moment, pretty much just the core. And we're trying to really work out what the special archaeological interest of the site is. Well, if I overlay my little coloured drawing of the top of the modern layout of the village.
From the old roads and boundaries, we can see how the priory site dominated the village and didn't include the parish church, which came later.
There's the church in the village, and that's where the priory is. They're two separate sites. So what we've got, in effect, is a precinct, which is all that area in there. That's fantastic.
The Augustinians clearly had a large and powerful establishment here in Blythburgh, and Stuart suspects it could be situated on an earlier royal minster. And we've now found signs of earlier, possibly Saxon occupation in both Jackie's and Matt's trenches. In fact, Matt's got proof of several earlier buildings on this site.
Got over that side.
Well, just behind me there, I've got a glazed tile, which is identical to the one we've got next to that wall. So I know I've got that floor level.
Yeah.
But behind me, in the Victorian cut, we've got the same level, and below that, I've got an earlier floor, really substantial, and below that, an early post hole as well. So I've got stuff going down pretty deep.
So the post hole is sealed by 2 floor levels?
Yep.
All right.
This structure could potentially be the earliest settlement on the site, and with a stretch of the imagination, even the place where King Anna might have been brought after his death on the marshes.
Well, it all looks fairly sort of typical high medieval. It looks like Grimston were. They're making it up in Norfolk near King's Lynn. That's exactly the sort of thing you'd expect to see used on the tables. Nice green glaze, nice sort of decoration on it. I mean, yeah, that fits perfectly.
Could this be evidence of the refectory or dining room Mick suspected was here?
You know, usage, more refractory?
Well, probably not. One pot doesn't make a refectory. Yes, there was a building here, but not the one we're looking for. If it had been part of the cloistral range, there would have been hundreds, even thousands of bodies laid to rest around here. So, after 3 days of searching, Mick has conceded that the cloister must have been on the north side.
It's most likely to be either Roman or Saxon.
And after a huge amount of work, John's mission to find the east end of the church has come to nothing. We couldn't recover enough material to be sure it was from the Priory Church, or for that matter, the earlier Saxon church.
It's an unusual stone type. It's not the same stone that we've got in the Priory.
But without digging here, we wouldn't have found this large, well-preserved male skeleton. It was buried with this amazing brooch, which dates the body to the late 13th century, when the priory was probably at its zenith. At the height of its power, the priory must have been an awe-inspiring place, a wealthy royal foundation and a focal point for pilgrims for hundreds of years. Radiocarbon analysis suggests the burials in Phil's Trench date to 930 AD. That means this man was buried 200 years before Henry I's priory was built on top of him. And in Jackie's Trench at the foot of the church, the bones date much further back to the mid-7th century. That's around the time that King Anna was killed. So we can safely say that we've looked the Saxons in the face. It looks as if their church was here on this site, even though it could have been destroyed in later Viking raids. As for the whereabouts of King Anna's tomb, that still remains a mystery. So even after this hugely frustrating dig with all its puzzles and dead ends, we can show Nick and Susan that an impressive Augustinian church ran across more than the full width of their garden, with a great tower held up by pillars towards the east end and a cloister to the north. Nick, you've been glued to this for ages now, haven't you?
Yes, it's fascinating.
I bet when we came here, you never thought you'd see all this.
No, it's been mind-blowing. Mind-blowing because, firstly, I didn't realise just how big the church was.
Yeah.
I just had no concept whatsoever.
You didn't even really know you got a church here,
Well, I
did you?
didn't. I had no idea whatsoever.
It doesn't bother you that we found all these skeletons?
No.
I've got a sneaking suspicion Susan absolutely adores it.
She does that.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses, and more. Please join us on this exciting journey. We need more support to make more episodes.
Imagine I'm a Georgian gentleman. I've just come from nearby fashionable Bath in order to visit Hun Street, one of the largest and most opulent mansions of the Georgian era. And no, it's not that. That's just the lodge. This grand design was the dream of local MP Francis Popham, who tragically never lived to see it realised. In fact, despite millions of pounds being spent on it, we don't know if it was even finished. 200 years later, all that's left of it is this portico. All the rest of it's somewhere underneath these stables. But the extraordinary thing is that apart from a couple of pretty little pictures, we don't know anything about it. We don't know who designed it, what it looked like inside, or even if anyone ever lived in it. There have been mansions at Hun Street since medieval times. Sir John Popham, one of the most important figures of Elizabeth I's court, acquired the estate in the 16th century. But it was his descendant Francis who built the last, and legend would have it, grandest mansion of them all. So is that portico there, that bit here?
That's it. This blown-up painting shows it nicely, doesn't it?
How long would this north front have been?
Well, in the 1920s, there was a particularly dry summer, and they recorded that the parch marks on the ground here were 200 feet wide by 120, and took that to be the side walls of the house.
That's 1, 2, 3. This is all looking a bit too easy. The eastern facade should be 100 feet away from the centre of the portico. Have you done the geophys for this area yet?
Of course we have.
And have you hit anything that might be our east wall?
Well, look at these results. The red line is actually that theoretical line at 100 feet. You can see this very clear black line right on the edge of our survey grid.
I tell you why I'm concerned, John. You see, this looks like a perfectly regular rectangular pile, doesn't it? But relative to the portico there, this thing's coming out at a cranky angle.
Yeah, it might just be the effect of the results, but I think the only way is we've got to dig it.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, because if we could actually pick up something really distinctive like this doorway, then from that we could extrapolate where the front wall and the back wall's going to be.
I mean, the other thing is, there's also this feature in the data. That might just be a ditch. Now, whether that's related to the house or an earlier phase of activity, I think it's worth looking at that as well.
Yeah. So in goes Trench 1 to locate the eastern facade.
Whoa, 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 that looks like a big bit of building, that does. That's the sort of stuff I'd have expected the building to be made of, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Manganese.
Manganese?
No, manganese.
Manganese.
Oh. Here, Francis. Now that looks like that mortar, look. That is that same mortar. That is exactly that same mortar as is over there.
On the portico?
That is. Go on then, John. Where's this on the geophysics?
Well, where I said it was.
Yeah, but I thought you said it was right at the end of the track.
No, look, you can see it. 2 metres in.
2 metres in.
2 metres? Oh, well, there you go then.
That's it?
That is it then.
It's still the first hour of the dig, and already it looks like we're onto the eastern facade of Francis Popham's grand mansion, a building project clearly intended to show off the family's status. You know how if you're building your own place and you run out of money, you park a caravan on site and rough it for a few months? Well, this is the Popham's version of that caravan. The lodge that Francis Popham built was up on the hill overlooking the moated medieval mansion, which we believe he demolished to make way for his new house. If there was a perfectly serviceable medieval building here anyway, why do you think Francis Popham spent so much money on building a new place?
Well, the 18th century is a century of improvement, and that's a key word. And people want to improve their estates. They want to prove their taste and their culture. And one of the ways that you do that is by building or rebuilding. And so putting up a new house or refronting an old house was very, very typical.
Back on site, Phil's discovered a gravel surface beside the wall line.
That looks like burnt flint.
Oh, it does look like burnt flint.
That looks like a yard surface,
well,
doesn't it?
That's it.
It's got bits of pottery, Welsh slate, charcoal.
Yeah, I mean, it goes right the way across, doesn't it?
Yeah. Have your trowel, mate.
Thank you.
A yard surface up against what looks like a wall suggests that we have found the eastern facade. But it's a bit nearer the portico than recorded parch marks had led us to believe. And now Jonathan's noticed that something about the portico doesn't quite add up.
All of the illustrations show 17 bays wide, so 17 windows.
Yeah.
So if each of these then should be 12 feet wide,
and
as
they're about
5 of the 17, this should be 60 feet long in all. But it looks to me like it's shrunk by
about half size, isn't it?
It is about half size.
Something's clearly wrong. We need to work out if it's just the portico that's small or the whole house. So in goes Trench 2 to find the south-east corner of Hun Street Mansion. The thing about Georgian buildings is that they conform to various architectural patterns and are therefore easy to date.
I think that's banked against the wall.
Something's not quite right about Hun Street, and it looks like we're going to have to rely on the archaeology to shed a little light. Phil expands his trench to find out if the wall thickens out enough to support 3 stories.
Well, that's it. And that's it there. So, we got close on 2 metres of it. It's looking thicker.
I walk into the house, I'm confronted by this spectacular 8-sided room. I go upstairs, what do I see then?
What you would have seen is a series of interconnecting rooms, because country houses by this time were made up of, at the top level, for entertaining. So they had rooms that connected one into the other, so you went from one into a slightly grander room into a slightly grander room. For instance, we know that there's a coved room that had 76 squares of blue tiling, and then you would have eventually got your way into the grand or great salon, and that would have been the room that you used for displaying your pictures, but it would also have been your ballroom.
These regular layouts should help us to reconstruct the inside of Hun Street Mansion, and we're beginning to get details from inside a room in the eastern corner. Before we can get going, Rakshas discovered a corner 2 metres away from the wall line on the geophysics. It lines up with the corner bridge found yesterday, so we're going to open up a huge trench right across the eastern wing to work out what Rakshas wall is and to get inside some of the rooms of the Georgian mansion. Geophysics are now trying to locate the west wing under the stables. In the eastern corner, we're digging through tons of rubble in what could be the mansion's cellars. And Matt's been investigating the flinty surface running outside the east wall.
We appear to have this feature or ditch or something. It starts here, where it's cut by this wall, and goes a good, metre and a half behind me there. So that's way too big for a construction cut for this wall, I think. So what I'm thinking is it might be maybe a part of the earlier moat, maybe. And it's cutting through all this stuff on the outside of the building. You see, you've got this kind of gravelly stuff here, and there's something linear going along there.
Woohoo! How about that for a wall, then?
Back on site, Phil's found another wall.
What do you think of that, then? That's a wall and a half, isn't it?
But it's much fatter than anything else we've seen.
What's think of that, then?
Bloody hell.
That's the other edge of it, look. That is a hell of a width, isn't it?
Isn't it?
Compared with everything else we've had.
It's twice the width.
Oh, stone me, that is a wall.
Running parallel, the thin outer wall turns a corner and kinks out to form one of 3 equal bays. Records suggest that our local builder never finished the west wing, most of which lies under the stable itself, where we can't touch it. But Jonathan thinks he's found a bit we can get at in the northwest corner of the building. So in goes Trench 4.
That's the face there.
And the best bits were sold off to Prior Park.
Well, that is nice.
The General left the portico as a relic of his uncle's grand design, while his family made the lodge their home.
Well, we got our sill, look here.
Phil's trench is now too deep to work in, but he's determined to get to the bottom of his basement room.
Oh, look at that. Is that look like you plaster to you?
It does, yes.
I mean, if I can hook that away, awkwardest form of digging I've ever done.
Yeah,
I'm sure that is a plastered surface there.
It's looking like it, isn't it?
Oh, look. Come here. Am I right in thinking that there's a line comes up through there?
Yeah.
Does that mean that's where the window's going to be then?
So it seems that there were windows looking over a dry moat running around the eastern wing, up to the mysterious corner where Jonathan thought we'd found a medieval chapel.
Well, I've been slapped round the face by the wet haddock of reality, haven't I? Because this felt like a medieval building. See what I mean? Those corner sort of seem like buttresses. But I don't mind at all, because if what I'm reading is right, is that stub there built into the corner?
Yeah, it's all part of the same thing. You can just see there's a vertical face down the bottom there, and you've got another one going along there.
That's fine. You're on the corner of that big wing that extends down to Phil's trench. And if that wall, the small one, is built into it, and it returns around this way and it's built into this corner, then we've got the same wall being built into both the wing and the moat wall at the same time. It's the same build, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes. Right.
This requires a major rethink, and it's now clear that the outside wall was built at the same time as the parapet wall. The question now is when, and right at the end of the day, Jonathan's found the answer.
This room now, we're past the rubble and we're on to the details which really revealed the period it was built in. And you can see the plaster lining there, squeezed between what were once wooden uprights against the wall. Some of it was panelled on this downstairs room, stores, scullery, kitchens, that sort of area. All that's typical of the 17th century. In the smart rooms, it might be coloured with tapestry. Down here, those cheap materials are well done for the kitchen staff.
Seems to me that after 3 days, we haven't discovered a Georgian mansion at all.
150 years after this was built, the Georgians slapped a bit of lipstick on it. That's basically it.
So it's a bit of Georgian cladding?
Yeah.
So Francis Popham's doomed grand design turns out to be the last flourish of a family intent on building ever more impressive houses. Sir John Popham acquired Hun Street's medieval manor around 1600 and constructed a new house befitting a Lord Chief Justice. But around the time of the Civil War, the next generation of Pophams built another house, the one we've uncovered. And over a century later, Francis spent a fortune refacing the outside of the house, lavishly remodelling the inside and transforming Hun Street's gardens. But to finish it was too expensive a proposition for his nephew, who eventually pulled it down and moved into the lodge.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Want us to make more episodes? Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses and more. And you get to have your say in the process as we develop new sites.
The mysterious ruins of Hopton Castle still bear the scars of a tragic past. 400 years ago, this fortress was torn apart by a Civil War siege. The small band of defenders inside, who were loyal to Parliament, gave their lives defending it against an army of King Charles I. Today, only the tower survives as witness to their heroic last stand, and nobody's got any idea what the rest of this castle looked like. So that's where we come in. We've been invited here by the local Preservation Society to try to find out, and maybe to solve a little mystery along the way. Richard, you're our castles expert, and you want us not only to sort out what the castle looked like during the Civil War, but to address the issue of a war crime.
Because not only is it a fantastic site, it's got a fantastic story with the Civil War siege and these brave garrison holding out against the Royalists for several weeks before finally surrendering and then being rather brutally murdered.
Most of what we know about the siege of Hopton comes from a man called Colonel Samuel Moore, the garrison commander. He wrote it all down in his journal, and it reads like a novel.
Game! Fire!
He says that the Royalists attacked the outnumbered defenders 3 times, losing hundreds of men. It was only when the attackers had the parliamentarians cornered in the tower that they finally gave up. Well, first thing first, and that is to find out what this place looked like. So Geophiz get to work looking for buildings.
6 then.
OK, thanks.
And Stuart, our landscape investigator, starts hunting for the castle's ramparts. From its shape, we suspect our Civil War castle may be medieval in origin. It fits the classic model of a motte bailey, which is basically a big tower on a mound with a defensive ring below it.
Suppose we start a trench somewhere about there. Yes?
It means Phil and Bill, the local English heritage inspector, can make an educated guess where the outer wall might be.
This wall, which we think might be part of the original medieval castle and might have been refurbished in the Civil War, down into what we think might have been part of the original backfill ditch, and then up onto this bank, which is probably going to be part of the defences or the assault in the Civil War. Yes?
Yes. That's what you call a turf, that is. That's Axminster, that is, Faith.
Alone and with no sign of relief, for 3 weeks, the 30-odd men behind these walls held out against hundreds of Royalist soldiers. And over in his trench, Phil thinks he may have found the first evidence of fighting.
We've got a musket ball. It's a bit splattered, but it's definitely a musket ball.
But is it Civil War?
I don't know, but given the site that we're on, I bet it is.
So, we're in the right period, but are we going to find the bloke who was on the other end of this? We'll know later. Phil's looking for the old castle wall and the moat, where we think we might find traces of the first attack.
This bank here was we thought originally might be part of the medieval castle defences. Well, we've gone down through it and we're getting masses and masses of brick.
Oh, brick.
But more importantly, we're beginning to get pottery too. You see here, I mean, here's the base of a pot, and here's another piece of pot, little tiny handle. But I mean, this stuff is clearly not medieval.
Still, if his rampart is from the Civil War, does it fit into the history?
The 26th of February is the first attack.
Over the next few days, Field Marshal Helen Geek is going to do a spot of wargaming.
Now, there's a body of foot who approach the out walls.
Along with Richard, our castle's expert, she's going to compare Colonel Moore's account of the battle with what we find in our trenches.
So let's put some more on.
OK.
But it's what happened after the siege that really intrigues me. So, the guys from the garrison who died could be over there where they're geophysing, or they could be somewhere completely different. It's just pot luck whether we find them or not. Is there anything that you've read in any of the documents that could narrow down the search for us?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the first one says it's a cellar. Now, we ought to be able to find a cellar with geophysics, and it would be very recognisable if we do encounter it. That's one good hypothesis that we can test, that they might be in a cellar. The second one is that all the sources concur in saying that they're somewhere near water, mud or water. And so I think that we could go for anywhere that's waterlogged or with standing water and have a look round there and see what we can find.
Well, John's been busy doing geophys, and he thinks he might have picked up a good candidate for a cellar not far from the tower.
John, you've done the Inner Bailey. What's it show?
It's pretty good. I mean, we've done mag and res, and I think we're starting to see clear buildings inside. Look at the magnetics to start with. So the white line is showing what I think is a big structure there, and the black on the inside, it's either midden deposits, areas of burning. In the resistance, you can also see the shadow outline of buildings. Now, what I think we've got in front of us here, you can see it clearly in the earthworks.
Pretty obvious, isn't it? Yeah.
You know, but we've got a wall going underneath that hawthorn bush. I think it actually turns through a right angle and comes back underneath our feet.
Our second trench goes in to see if we've got a cellar. So that's one possibility for the mass grave. But what about the muddy ditch? I'd assumed that our whole team were over here trying to sort out the castle until I saw this little head bobbing up and down behind these rather nasty nettles. Henry, what are you doing?
Once I get to the bottom with the auger, when I look at the soil down there, I will be able to tell whether it's flowing water through there or whether it's still water or whether it's just a muddy hole.
Some of the documents say the dead bodies were found in a muddy pit.
Right.
You could be giving us some evidence, couldn't you?
Yeah, no, this should tell part of that story, yeah.
Phil's doggedly digging away trying to work out the shape of the castle. He's changed his tune from this morning. He now reckons we do have a wall. It's just underneath the earth bank he found earlier.
All right.
Look at it. Look at that.
Yeah.
It's the burning is running underneath. So the construction of that bank is later than that burning. You know, I do wonder what the hell all this burning is, though.
Well, we know the buildings were burnt during the siege.
Well, exactly. You see, you does make you wonder.
It looks like by the time of the Civil War, the Inner Bailey was surrounded by a small and rather unimpressive wall. And instead of a moat, it had earthworks. And at the centre of it could be a very large building.
It looks like we're coming onto a sort of different level here. We've been through this incredibly loose, compacted brick deposit. Yeah. Which I guess is what? Do you think the walls of the building?
Yeah. This is beginning to be more like one of those crime scene investigation shows than a Time Team.
Bit of gold.
But then, as is always the case on Time Team, something turns up which you don't expect. I heard some bleeping and the words gold.
Oh, yes. We've got a gold-hammered coin.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
the spoil from the bottom of this trench.
This extraordinary thing about gold, that when it does come out, it just shines straight away, doesn't it?
It does, yes. As if it was put there yesterday.
Look at your face. You're quite pleased, aren't you?
Very pleased. It's made my year.
Helen's got to double-check the date, but could this gold coin have been dropped by one of the garrison, or even by their killers? In the hands of trained soldiers and at close quarters, muskets were deadly. It makes Moore's claim to have shot and killed hundreds of royalists at the breach sound much more plausible. But where did this happen? Our armchair generals are playing toy soldiers to find out.
So they're through the breach, most of the 200, so it's at least 100. They're within the breach, but not within our works, but as in a pinfold in the circumference of the burnt lodging. What is a pinfold?
It's basically a very large sheep pen. It's for sorting out sheep.
So they're caught in a trap?
Yeah, they can't move.
Yeah. So do you know where that first breach in the wall happens?
I have very strong suspicions, Helen, it's in this area down here. Anybody coming through this narrow gap in the breach would be trapped. They could be fired down from there, from there. They're literally trapped like sheep in a sheepfold.
If Stuart's right, then somewhere here should be a range of buildings which resemble a sheep pen. As well as giving us a direct link to the history, if we do have structures here, they'd make this castle far larger than we first thought. We're going to have to ponder this one over a few beers tonight. But before we can down tools and raise glasses...
Whoa! My goodness!
We've got our hands full with yet another remarkable find from the cellar.
I think that's a cannonball. In fact, I'd put even money on that being a cannonball.
So could this mean we're close to the end of the siege?
Just feel how heavy that is, Tony.
Just that little bit of it is some weight, isn't it?
Yeah. Imagine that coming crashing in through the walls and landing right in the bottom of the cellar. I'm in no doubt now that this is the brick dwelling house referred to in the siege accounts. And what we know is that the defenders set fire to it to stop the royalists using it. So I guess what we've got here is evidence of burnt timbers, being fired on with ordnance. Surely this now locks us in the history and archaeology together.
What a beautiful spot you've brought me to. Get a lovely view of the castle here. But there's nothing here.
There is something here, though, because if you look in this area over here, Phil, there are lots of lumps and bumps that suggest that there might have been buildings here and walls, that there were things blocking this end up here.
And for once, I agree with Stuart.
What's that there, going that way?
Here?
Yeah.
That's my wall.
Matt's found the far end of our brick building. And it isn't just a house, it's a mansion. In fact, it was so big, the builders had to fill in the moat around the tower just to squeeze it into the bailey. Our archaeology has now built up a terrifying picture of the final 48 hours of the defenders' lives. And it backs up Colonel Moore's journal in every detail. After being bombarded by constant fire with the attackers through the breach, the defenders set the brick mansion on fire before fleeing to the tower. A terrifying sequence of events which we found in both the archaeology and the documents. They were now at the mercy of the royalist commander, Sir Michael Woodhouse, and Richard thinks he's worked out how he forced them to surrender.
All I had to do is run up the bank and attack that. That looks like a door, but it's actually a window opening. Now, they're trapped on the top floor. They can't do anything about people attacking the bottom of the castle.
So this is another example of this building not really doing its job as a defence because it had a vulnerable window close to the ground.
Yes, because the window, either side of the window, the wall is only about that thick. So it's dead easy to actually bash through. I think what we can see there is what was done during the Civil War.
And that's what makes them give up, because they think that they're going to lay explosives and they say it's better to surrender than to be blown up.
Yeah.
Extraordinary, isn't it, to see something so vulnerable from all those years ago that led to such a terrifying end.
Yeah.
It's ironic that the strongest looking part of the castle, the tower, was actually the weakest. And everything we found over the past few days suggests that in both medieval times and during the Civil War, Hopton was more of a country house than a castle. It's turned our knowledge of this place on its head and explains why the defenders failed to hold on to it. But it also begs the question, why did Moore and his men defend a hopeless cause? Why did Moore refuse to surrender when he had 3 opportunities to do so?
It's difficult to explain. We can only think that he must have been inspired by religious fanaticism or by the belief that God would come to his aid, or because he was terribly afraid of the Royalist army. He'd possibly been reading the newspapers as well and hearing these stories about the massacre of helpless prisoners, and he possibly didn't trust the Royalists off Firth of Quarter.
What about the other side? Why did Woodhouse allow such a terrible atrocity to take place?
Well, that's the really difficult question to answer. Somehow, we were off the map of chivalry, and chivalry and honour did operate in most of these Civil War encounters. There were rules that you could follow, like table manners. The fact that the first offers of quarter were refused may have made him feel that they were off the map. But I suspect one of the accounts of the massacre says that Woodhouse left his men to themselves for 3 hours. It was normal Royalist behaviour, but in this case they seem to have been particularly violently inspired, and that might be the cause of the massacre.
But evidence of that massacre continues to elude us. With no signs of a mass grave anywhere else, we were praying that we'd find one at the bottom of the cellar. But alas, as the day draws to a close, we've got to admit defeat.
You're kind of performing the last rites on this trench then, aren't you, Phil?
Well, I reckon I am.
So you're completely convinced that's natural, are you?
Well, look, here's the bottom of the wall.
Yeah, built right on top.
Absolutely. I know, I think this is a deposit that not even a parliamentarian or a royalist ever saw.
But while we haven't found any bodies, we're pretty confident our cellar does match one description of where the men were said to have been killed. It's unfinished without any plaster, and it's also at the bottom of a burning building. And what about it being full of stinking water? Well, most intriguingly of all, computer modelling suggests that our cellar was liable to flooding as well. Who knows? Perhaps this was their place of execution after all. After the battle was over, Hopton was left a smoking ruin. The tower was badly damaged and fell into disrepair. For several weeks, a small band of men had turned this country house into a small fortress and held out against overwhelming and terrifying odds. 400 years on, we've pieced together their last stand and discovered the magnificent 17th century chamber block where they fought and may have died. This morning, Neil, you said to me, Tony, the excavation of this trench will unveil the story of this castle. Has it done that?
Oh, it has. The archaeology has worked out so well. What we've now found is this huge post-medieval cellar. It's about 20 metres long, and above that you've got to imagine a 2 or 3 storey brick house. And it's placed here deliberately to replace that. That was old-fashioned, old news. If you had money, this is how you lived. Imagine chimneys, fancy windows, plastered ceilings. This was all mod cons.
It is ironic that the new building should have been burnt down and the garrison retreat to the old one.
Absolutely. At the time of the war, forget the word castle. Hopton was a house, and fighting was taking place in all sorts of places during the Civil War, not just on set-piece battlefields, not just storming of castles, but everyday houses were being attacked and bloody murder was taking place at close quarters.
Hello, my name's John Gator. Time Team is fan-funded by Patreon. This vital support helps us to make new episodes. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models and masterclasses, plus lots more.